Hello, my name is Dennis Delgado. I'm presenting this video as part of the Digital Visual Studies series organized by Dr. Robert Sweeney. Dr. Sweeney invited me to speak a little bit about my practice, some of the art projects I've created, as well as to speak a bit about my background and any future projects that I may have underway. I am Puerto Rican. I grew up both in the Bronx and Manhattan. I studied studio arts and was a film studies major as an undergraduate at the University of Rochester. While I didn't double major in studio arts, I think most of my interest was not medium specific. It kind of brought, my practice varied from anywhere from drawing to photography all the way to the moving image. I think my primary focus as in undergrad became film, both film theory, film production, but as well as film analysis and looking at the kind of psychological and cultural dynamics that appeared in film, both historically, leading into the beginning of or the inception of the moving image in the early 20th century, everywhere to the moving image in present day. I graduated from the University of Rochester in 1997, which is a long time ago at this point, but I worked in the film industry for about a year and a half, mainly as a production assistant, really kind of doing grunt work and learning how the commercial industry in New York City functioned. I segued from that into teaching. I taught documentary video production at a place called the Educational Video Center, which is still in operation. It's a non-for-profit agency that teaches video production to high school students in New York City. From there, I realized I wanted to teach, or really enjoyed the process of teaching and how it informed my work and kind of motivated me as an artist on my own. I think trying to motivate young art students to understand the importance of not only visual culture, but art in general, and how it could contribute to our own kind of educational development, as well as our own kind of personal expression. I think art in our society or being an artist in our society is particularly challenging. And so I think, in the process of trying to motivate high school students, many from underprivileged or under resourced areas or communities, was a challenge I really liked, and kind of helped me define me as an artist as well. I'm going to try and talk a little bit about my interests, both as a young artist and moving into maybe what could be called the middle of my career. I've slowly but surely become a new media artist, and I currently teach new media at Baruch College in New York City. I'm an assistant professor there. And began this year in 2023, and have been teaching there, up until the present. I'm on a tenure track position, so I'm hoping to continue my practice as well as to balance that with teaching undergraduate students at what's not traditionally a studio arts program or an art school, which is another challenge that I've kind of taken on. I mean, I've been asked also to kind of speak about my art influences. They are many and broad. I think one of the first most obvious uh, motivations or artistic influences certainly was Picasso and some of the traditional post-impressionists, as well as some of the fauvists. I took an art history class early in, or in the last year of my high school education, and was very, just fascinated by Van Gogh, the post-impressionist, Monet, uh, who is an impressionist, but also Cubism and some of the art movements in the early 20th century. For me, Cubism kind of represented this introduction of time into the two-dimensional plane, which I think hadn't been explored, uh, or understood very well in the early 20th century, and something that I think is, a tremendous and enduring revolution in the visual arts. I think from there, more contemporary artist, Jean-Michel Basquiat, was a very early obvious influence. In 1992, I attended his retrospective at the Whitney Museum. It was the first time I had kind of comprehensively seen all of his work in one location, and had really kind of learned a lot more about the artist, how he grew up in New York City, is both of Haitian and Puerto Rican descent, which I think was significant for me as well. I think Basquiat has become, obviously a huge figure, and a huge influence to a whole generation of artists. I kind of grew up reading about him, as well as Keith Haring, and really began developing also, or had developed in high school, an interest in graffiti art for many years, which I still do a lot of drawing that's kind of based in graffiti and in developing that kind of way of expression, I should say. The other thing that I think really has influenced me, certainly beginning in my undergraduate career as an artist, was visual and cultural studies, and visual and cultural studies, criticism, both of visual culture, meaning film and art. One of the earliest theorists that I encountered was Bell Hooks, and Bell Hooks certainly played an instrumental role in the beginning of my painting career, and some of the art that I produced in undergraduate. That also had an influence on my filmmaking. I made at least four or five major Super 8 films, as well as two significant videos. One of them exploring my father's life, his early life growing up in Spanish Harlem, and the second video focused mostly on the graffiti art scene in Rochester. From there, I guess the best way for me to proceed is maybe to begin to look at some of the work on my website, and kind of talk about how I've gotten to the place. So I'm gonna click. I'm just moving over here to my website. This is probably the latest, or the latest complete project. These are images from the dark database. I'll talk a little bit more about this in detail. I want to begin just by going back to a project that kind of led to the dark database, and that's called MBI. MBI was the kind of lost name of Oda Benga, who was an African tribesman who was put on display both at the Museum of Natural History in New York City and eventually at the Bronx Zoo in 1906. This ethnographic display, which I think at least at the turn of the century or the early 20th century, was actually a pretty standard practice. Often people of African descent being removed from their traditional settings in the Congo specifically, and being brought to World's Fairs, both in the late 19th century and early 20th century, and being sort of presented as an ethnographic educational experience, meaning that some of their traditional, in the case of African tribesmen, bark cloth is a traditional cloth that's created and adorned by African Mbuti tribesmen, and which were kind of displayed alongside with actual African human beings in these World's Fair, and kind of presented as an introduction to a more, I guess, primitive society was the way that they were framed, or primitive peoples, the way they were framed in the early 20th century. So I spent about 3 or 4 years going to the Bronx Zoo, photographing them, doing archival research, looking at some of the remaining structures from that time. So I took a great deal of photographs of the monkey house, or the primate house, as it was called. This was actually the structure that Ota Benga was placed in or exhibited in. He was shown in one of the outdoor cages alongside an orangutan. So here's a photograph of that actual cage. There were two books, two comprehensive books that were written about Ota Benga's experience, and about about his life and this specific event in his life. He ended up in Virginia and committed suicide, I guess, in his late 20s. So it was obviously a traumatic event for him to be removed from his native land of the Congo, and brought and kind of exhibited in this extremely demeaning and heartbreaking way. From here, I kind of continued this interest of how Africans, and eventually how African Americans are kind of displayed or presented through these kind of practices of looking. One of the books that I was reading at the time was called Experimental Ethnography by Catherine Russell. One of the things that stood out in that book was this kind of presentation, or the use of the cage as this kind of device of looking that provided both a separation from the viewer or the spectator, and also allowed for this kind of almost 360, or at least 180-degree visibility to the public. So I was interested in this kind of device being used as a kind of educational tool to present this kind of false narrative, or false idea of African tribesmen as an intermediary between our kind of primate ancestors and the current kind of Eurocentric white educated male. There were Madison Grant and others, other eugenicists were involved in creating the Bronx Zoo. Also, Teddy Roosevelt was an early kind of precursor of the Bronx Zoo. He had a hunting and club that he was in with a number of prominent figures in New York, and they together kind of formed this organization, which eventually became the Wildlife Conservation Society. They had very specific ideas. This was, I mean, the context of this was really Darwin's Origin of the Species, and the kind of understanding or the revelation that human beings had had been evolved from primates, and that idea, I think, was really what caused this kind of idea that Africans somehow might represent, and this was kind of in scientific literature at the time, that they would represent this kind of step towards the modern civilized man. I really, I don't, when I think about this work, it was really kind of, I think, my own kind of personal journey in trying to reconcile both how someone can internalize white supremacy, or this idea that African or Black men are somehow inferior or underdeveloped. And I think coming to terms with that history and its kind of lingering effects on today, and how people of color, and I think I began specifically with African American males, but how people of color have been shaped in the dominant imaginary of our times. And I think this is, part of what I was trying to access or look at the Bronx Zoo. Many of these images, I really don't, are pretty straight on. I don't think I spent a tremendous amount of time trying to make work that spoke about this history, but just to look at the kind of traces, material traces of that history presently. And so that's, I think, what these images really try to accomplish. I was simultaneously trying to say something about these practices of looking, and how taxonomic practices in zoology also kind of correspond with eugenics and this kind of false structuring of race, or the construct of race, as a distinguishing factor in creating a discourse, right, that that ultimately puts people of color at a discursive disadvantage, and this kind of misunderstanding of the sophistication that specifically African and Mbuti tribesmen had, and how these cultures are still kind of preached to, but also how their own priorities are secondary to those of the Wildlife Conservation Society. So the Bronx Zoo still maintains a relationship with the Congo. It still presents African and Mbuti tribesmen alongside gorillas in what's now called the Congo gorilla forest, which is a very new way of presenting the primates. And one of the videos I look or that's on my website looks or films part of this structure, and I can hopefully cue that up in a second here. So immediately following this image, you'll see that there's a presentation, or you'll see this kind of glass enclosure that exists today, and how practices of viewing haven't changed. I think the technology for the technology to present this information has changed, but certainly not the practice of separation, right? But also of equating primates with African and Buti tribesmen, literally to this day. This, continued to evolve into my interest of how technologies of vision are used to epistemologically, and how they're used to shape how we think about people of color. That specifically led to my interest in surveillance, as well as in facial recognition, and what led ultimately to this database of images that are compiled from films. So the Dark Database project is what I'm alluding to. This project I began in 2019. I'm gonna just pull up a presentation here. I got introduced to facial recognition primarily through Simone Brown's book, Dark Matters, on their surveillance of Blackness. I began to think about or understand that facial recognition had also kind of carried in a similar practice of looking in terms of how we saw people of color. In the case of facial recognition, open computer vision is the technology that is used, or one of the technologies that's used in facial recognition. I continue to be interested in surveillance and in some of the strategies that were used, not only to include people of color, make it more difficult for them to be identified and therefore classified. Well, actually identified. They are classified as kind of other and not not part of the mainstream. So as I said, I was introduced to facial recognition through Simone Brown's book, Dark Matters, on the surveillance of Blackness. One of the this is one quote that I had in a presentation on the dark database. Facial scan technologies may produce higher failure to enroll rates for dark-skinned users, not due to the lack of distinctive features, of course, but to the quality of images provided to the facial scan system by video cameras optimized for lighter-skinned users. What their research and development tells us is that their technology privileges whiteness, or at least lightness, in its use of lighting and in the ways in which certain bodies are lit and measured in the enrollment process. So Dr. Brown was kind of instrumental in me kind of understanding some of the assumptions that are made in developing these systems, as well as some of the corners that they cut to release the software, as well as implement it. There were already a number of cases that where people were misidentified by facial recognition systems that were used by law enforcement without really kind of any knowledge of their bias or understanding of their complexity, and some of the things that still are problematic about these systems. So in this kind of process, I am not a coder. I've worked as a computer technician, and so I have some familiarity with computers, and I'm pretty comfortable around Macintosh, the Macintosh operating system. And one of the things I learned was that I could actually install and begin to use Open Computer Vision on my own computer. And one of the websites that one of the websites that really kind of was extremely helpful in this process is Pi Image Search. There's a whole set of step-by-step instructions on how to install computer vision on your Macintosh, how to implement and install Python, which is the programming language that's used with Open Computer Vision. Those are really the two things necessary to begin to run Python scripts that use libraries that are available on the internet as open source packages that contain Open Computer Vision. The process, it took me about probably a month to get the first script to execute correctly. And also just took me some time to reach out to a student coder to help me tailor those scripts to be able to run facial recognition or facial detection on video images. So I began, also about thinking about how could I possibly make a work that spoke about this particular issue. I think one of the common strategies used by artists that are interested in surveillance and in surveillance practices is really to kind of hack into some of these systems and databases and to obscure images that they contain and render them somehow inoperable. The other thing that is often used to train facial recognition systems are online databases of anyone who's been arrested and anyone who's been arrested and photographed for the purposes of law enforcement. So there are a host of databases online that contain images of people who've had their mugshots taken and who unknowingly have been used to train facial detection and facial recognition algorithms. In that respect, I didn't want to begin my own project, with the same kind of activist and maybe illegal practices, but I wanted to try and use a familiar kind of form in the visual culture, and the most obvious was a portrait. So I began by thinking about what films or what videos I wanted to run these algorithms on. I realized that, as a previous film studies person, one of the areas that where representation is still a kind of contested battleground is really narrative films. So I began to look for films that I had seen pivotal in terms of race and in terms of how people of color are portrayed and depicted. And I wanted to run these algorithms on films that where at least an African American actor was a prominent or lead in the film. I knew that from being a filmmaker, that typically the lead in the film will have the largest sort of graphic weight on the screen. And I wanted to contrast that with an algorithm that I knew was biased and that would have trouble recognizing people with darker skin. So the very first film that came to mind was Antoine quaz training day. I wanted to try running the algorithm on the entire film. I was able to tailor the script to scan every 30th frame or every second of the film, and would have that export a JPEG from that film, which I could then use to composite a single portrait. I'm looking through. So as I stated, I had the script run through the film training day and export each time it detected a face, export a JPEG file of that face. So the image would be cropped and just include a single face that was detected in the film. If I look, I'm just going to share my screen again. This is essentially the file I used to create the composite image. You'll see that there's a total of, at least in this iteration, there's a total of 200 faces. If I turn on each of those faces, I used, excuse me, a simple kind of facial template to help center the face, and then went through the process of enlarging each layer, centering it, placing the eye line on a specific spot in that template. And this kind of became the way of me kind of at least introducing my own hand into the work, so to speak, in that most of the images I centered and reoriented and placed within this template, but also then used Photoshop to calculate the median pixel value for each detected face in the image. And what I ended up with was this kind of ghostly image of a face that contains really the kind of statistical reading of the film through the kind of lens of open computer vision. The process, I mean, it ended up, I think, taking about 6 months to do the first portrait, and then I kind of continued the same practices. In this case, I familiarized myself with Python in the process, and also began to run this more and more on films by directors of color, where the lead character was either an African American or in a couple of cases a Hispanic male. This is the composite image for Get Out. There's sort of 9 images in the series. I'm still, continuing this process. I've began to look at other aspects of open computer vision, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. This is from the film Deep Cover. So this was directed by Bill Duke. It's from the 1990s. This is Ryan Coogler's Black Panther, a composite image of all of the faces detected in Black Panther. The other thing that was interesting to me about this process is to bring the kind of palette of the film and the kind of mood and temperature of each film into the portrait itself. So there were instances where I didn't crop the image, but have a full landscape composite of many of the colors that are contained in each of these films. I'll just continue through these. This is from John Singleton's film Higher Learning. I'll just keep going through these. Again, this is the composite image from Training Day. This is a composite portrait from the film Do the Right Thing. Do the Right Thing was really kind of instrumental in to me in kind of understanding the dynamics of race and seeing them kind of put up in the screen by someone of color, I think was significant for me, certainly in the 1990s when I was in high school. This is a composite image from the film Moonlight. And this is from the film Empire, which was directed by a Puerto Rican director. And finally, this was a composite image from the film Pinheiro, which was directed by the late Leone Chasu on the Puerto Rican poet Miguel Pinheiro. So those are all of the images in the dark database. I'm continue to work, as I said, more on computer vision. I've kind of turned my interest to look at specifically African American athletes and how the kind of spectacle or our visual culture's obsession with the African American athlete is, I think, probably the biggest aspect that's kind of made me look at computer vision. So I've begun reading about, at least in this case, monocular depth estimation, which is a practice that's used in open computer vision to train self-driving automobiles, self-driving trains. It's a technique used to take a single image and understand the three-dimensionality of it and place this kind of map over the image to create something that suggests this kind of depth landscape within the in this case, moving images. I'm just going to click. I mean, one of the things that occurred to me, and I'll share my screen again. In looking at Oda Benga's cage, I noticed that on the roof of that cage, there was this kind of semicircle and rectangle shape that at least echoed to me the markings on a basketball court. And so I kind of began to see ties between this kind of spectatorship of looking at an African male in a cage and looking at African American athletes on the basketball court. And I think that really has led me to, and I'll show one of the videos that I'm currently working on. This is, I've sort of looked into the open computer vision community, have begun to look at some of the scripts that are developed for training AI systems, as well as, like I said, self-directed vehicles or self-driven vehicles. I use an algorithm called Depth Anything, which was developed in China to apply a color map. So these images are from a video that I have begun to work on. Both images are from well, the first image on the left-hand side here is of Allen Iverson, a now retired basketball player. This was a commercial that looks at this kind of signature move that this player is known for. And I wanted to, the way that the camera kind of moves in this commercial is, for me, evoked at least some of the spectatorship involved in looking at Oda Benga. And I thought it'd be interesting to run the algorithm on this commercial, and I'll show what that looks like. I also kind of paired it with, let me enlarge this. Paired this commercial with some of the highlights from this this basketball player's career. What we're looking at now is just how the camera moves in looking at Allen Iverson as he kind of performs its signature move. So the set for this commercial is kind of interesting. It's this kind of clear basketball floor that allows us to see below the player, allows us to see every single angle. And I think this, for me, this struck me as kind of interesting way to look at young African-American males. There's two actors, one playing a defender here, and then Allen Iverson playing the offensive or on the offensive end. And so I slowed the video down to kind of look at this, and also to really kind of minimize typically the depth map that's imposed on these images by the software has a color spectrum. So I've kind of tried to reduce that color to a grayscale. And one of the other kind of thoughts that I had kind of going on in my head at the same time was Derrida's theory of hauntology and how it kind of disrupts time and space, but also reveals this kind of ghostly presence or absence that exists. And I kind of saw that theory as behind some of the images in the dark database, if not all of them, of this kind of presence of institutionalized racism and a kind of lack of regard or recognition of people of color. And I think that similar thinking is taking place here, in that at least in terms of the image itself, we're looking at something that at least within depth estimation, looks like this kind of ghostly white figure of the player. So that's really the direction I've moved in since the dark database. I am still interested in race and kind of technologies of vision, amongst other things, but this is really kind of where my work and my research has brought me to. I think monocular depth estimation is very different from facial recognition. But I know for a fact that a lot of these algorithms were built on previous assumptions of what constitutes the figure that's moving and how to both trace and recognize or detect the motion in the image. And so I'm still kind of interested in all those areas with regard to people of color. So I hope this is helpful. I wanted to, offer at least my email address if anyone's interested in kind of discussing or collaborating on work that examines some of these issues moving forward. Again, my email address is just my first name, last name, Dennis with 2 N's, Delgado at yahoo.com. But I wanted to offer that up as well if anyone has any questions about the work or would like to speak to me directly. Before I conclude, I guess I just want to thank Robert Sweeney for his interest in my work. I really am happy and excited about participating in the digital visual studies publication, as well as in the resources that kind of surround the publication. And I hope this is helpful and inspiring to other young artists who are interested in similar issues. That's it for me. Bye-bye.